Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
Welcome to Missing in Canada, an ongoing series by the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners, and welcome back to Missing in Canada, my ongoing series that explores the stories and circumstances of Canadian missing persons cases. In this episode, our story is going to take us to the quiet town of Wolfville, Nova Scotia. In September of 1992, then 20-year-old Cape Bretoner Kenley Matheson arrived in Wolfville to begin classes at Acadia University. But Kenley's time in Wolfville is going to be short. Only 2 weeks into the school year, he was last seen by a friend walking down Main Street in Wolfville. There hasn't been any proof of life, nor a credible sighting of him since. Tonight, in this episode of Nighttime, I'm going to be joined by Canadian crime content creator Madalayne Klein to discuss the disappearance of Kenley Matheson.
It was the fall of 1992, 2 weeks into the start of the school year at Acadia University in Wolfville. 20-year-old Alan Matheson, known as Kenley, was a freshman studying biology. Then, on September 21st, he disappeared. His sister Kay, the first to notice something was wrong, left him a note in his dorm room. For Kenley's mother, it's been a painful 2 decades. She has searched tirelessly for answers, at one point hiring her own private investigator. Just today, Kenley's case was added to the province's Major Unsolved Crimes Reward Program. While the money is meant for information that leads to an arrest or conviction, that's not what his mother is looking for.
My goal is to find his body where his body is. And I'll be happy with that. Like, I am not going any further, if there's somebody to be charged or it's going to go to court. If somebody would just come forward with just the information of, where his body might be.
At that point, she says, she can truly accept what happened to her son.
Madalayne Klein, how are you this evening?
I'm great. How are you?
Great. And your night's about to get even better because I got a compliment for you. Are you ready for this? It's not.
I'm ready.
It's not from me,
so
hold off. My mother listens to my podcast a lot, and especially if I do anything related to Toronto, because she lived there for a long time. And I just before we started here, got off the phone with my mother. And she let me know 2 things. One, she educated me on a mistake I made during the TTC episode we did together. I think I said Toronto's one of the biggest cities in Canada, and I expressed some doubt in that statement. She let me know, she corrected me and let me know that it in fact is, and she gave me a whole bunch of numbers comparing Toronto with other cities in Canada. But then she said, and that Madalayne Klein who was on your show, she was fantastic. I could listen to her all day. So,
that's so nice.
You got a fan. I was like, you should listen to her on TikTok, Mom. And my mom was like, what's TikTok? And I was like, never mind. She'll be back on my show.
Never mind. That's so nice.
So you have a fan. But then I told you that I have a friend who is like a hardcore TTC fan.
Yes. And I was like, I didn't realize you could be a fan of the TTC, but you can.
I have a friend who's a massive fan of the TTC. He listened to the episode as well. And I think he felt disrespected that both of us didn't know as much about the TTC as any TTC loving rider should. So he hates us both now. We're not friends anymore.
He probably collapsed when I asked what a streetcar was.
Yeah, he did. He contacted Apple Podcasts. He's having the episode removed, actually.
He's like, I'd like to report these 2.
But that's the feedback from the prior episode, but we got a lot to get into tonight, so we can't reminisce about mistakes made in lives past. We're here to talk about the disappearance of Kenley Matheson, a fellow Nova Scotian with myself, also fellow Cape Bretoner. Kenley is from Cape Breton Island, where I'm from, and there's not a lot of stories about Cape Breton that find their way to the documentaries and podcasts of the world. But due to tragic circumstances, Kenley Matheson's name is one that gets spoken about a lot when people are discussing unsolved Nova Scotian or Canadian crime, missing persons cases. His case is also added to Nova Scotia's list of Major Rewards for Unsolved Crimes, which is a government initiative to offer large rewards for tips related to unsolved crimes. So getting your unsolved case or your missing persons case on that list is kind of like being, having like a criminal on the 10 most wanted list of the United States or something.
That's really cool. I like that Nova Scotia does that.
Yeah, it's large rewards. I've heard some criticism of the way the program works, but what the program certainly does is when a case gets added to that, the media reports on it more, and it just adds a lot more exposure than a case would have had it not been on that.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure most provinces have something similar. I would imagine, but for whatever reason in Nova Scotia, it's something that's often talked about, and I see media referencing it a lot.
Okay, maybe I just haven't looked into it.
So Kenley Matheson, you're on the other side of the country from him. Did you know this story before my listeners contacted us recommending we cover it?
I am sure my best friend who lives in Fredericton, I'm sure he suggested the name months ago. Actually, I'm wearing my East Coast Lifestyle bunny hug.
Oh.
And my bestie got it for me.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Shout out. Thank you, bestie.
Yeah, I think I'm sure he suggested the name to me, but then the next time I heard it was when you suggested it.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of those stories where I've heard the story. I've had listeners recommend it for literally for years, and I've been really close to doing an episode on Kenley multiple times, and just for whatever reason it had never happened, and I always put off kind of digging into his story till a point that I was actually going to do the episode. So I didn't know his story in any detail beyond he was a young man who disappeared just days or weeks after enrolling in and moving to Acadia University in Wolfville. But that was literally all I knew about it for years, despite...
Do you remember it happening?
No, this would have been... I would have only been like 92. I only would have been 11 years old.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, just a kid. But it's like where I learned about this story, I think, is just, we've talked about this lots of times, but on like the 10th anniversary of a disappearance or something, there'll be a couple articles that come out. So that's where I learned about it, is just seeing his photo, the same photo or two getting shared around on like anniversaries, and again, having listeners reach out about it. And I think what's brought this up now and encouraging us to do this episode, I've heard from a lot of people reaching out requesting we cover this his story on the show as a result of a new documentary series that was recently released on, we both watched it. Was it Amazon we watched it?
Amazon Prime, yeah.
Yeah, on one of those services. But that has kind of brought a documentary that explores his story, has kind of brought his the depth of his case more public than what people had known prior. But I'm sure as we go, we'll get into the documentary a little bit, but I think we'll focus more so on just, the facts of his case in the predominant theories that are getting discussed. But we can, maybe in the end, we'll give some thoughts on the documentary, because I know a lot of my listeners had watched it.
Perfect.
Let's start with some basics. Do you want to give a rundown of who he was and where he was and how this kind of occurs?
So Kenley Matheson was originally born in Cape Breton in 1972. And then in 1992, when he was 20, he went off to Wolfville, Nova Scotia to attend Acadia University.
Yeah, it's a university, and it's a tiny little town, and really the only reason to go there is either for like a good cup of coffee and a day trip, or because you're attending Acadia University.
Okay.
It's on the other side of almost on the other side of the province of Nova Scotia from Cape Breton. So this is certainly leaving home, but although Kenley, he was only 20 years old at this point, it wasn't a big move for him, because he had already, before going to university, he had like lived a life. He traveled, worked out west for, on his own for a year, planting trees. Like for a 20-year-old from small town Nova Scotia, he got around. I
loved hearing about where he went and what he did. He sounded like the coolest guy ever. He sounded like just a free spirit, and I just love people like that. So
certainly sounded like an adventurous guy. He went out west to BC to plant trees for a while, which sort of when you look at what life is like for someone who's doing that, it's almost like moving on to like a hippie commune or something. It's just a bunch of people living in the middle of the nowheres, doing their thing.
Yeah.
From there, he met some friends and connections that led him to going to South America on a motorcycle as a young man.
I think he went from Cape Breton to Banff on the motorcycle.
Oh, yes.
And then he walked or attempted to walk to the rainforest or just to save it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what that was about.
Yeah,
but
I
he
forgot
walked
about
for
that.
the rainforest.
Yeah, there was like someone. Yeah, so he was in Banff for a while. Then there was someone who was walking.
Can we just appreciate that Cape Breton, Nova Scotia to Banff, Alberta is like over 5,000 kilometers. That's a hike.
That's a mission.
That would be so much fun, like on a Harley.
Yeah.
That would be the best.
Yeah, that's right. He went across the country on the motorcycle, and then at one point there was, we're kind of mixing up like his, the 2 or 3 years before his disappearance, because he did a lot in that period of time. But there was someone in the news that was like walking to South America as some kind of like activism for like save the rainforest sort of thing.
Save the rainforest, yeah.
And Kenley read about him and was like, I'm going to go join up.
I want to do that.
Yeah, and it seems like he just hooked up with this guy and at least went for a part of the journey. But at one point he ends up in, and I want to kind of hit on this a little bit because we'll come back to it, but at one point he ends up going to places I had never even heard of in South America with a friend to... It didn't seem like they really went there for much of any reason. I believe they just went there just to get away for a while.
It sounds like they had a great time. They like took a ferry to like Belize or Mexico, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. That would have been so cool.
Yeah, especially again as a like 19, 20-year-old from small town Nova Scotia. These adventures are something else, and it definitely take some guts and definitely take the ability to just be like, I'm stepping out of my comfort zone and I'm out of here. But I think
he did that motorcycle trip like at 18.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Super young. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this stuff is important to hit on because when you get into the idea that he goes to university and then 2 weeks later he's missing, it's easy to think of him as like, this is his first time away from home and it was too much. But no, in Kenley's life, going to Wolfville for university would have been a walk in the park, although he's moving away from home or whatever. But his time in Wolfville, which again is a small little town in Nova Scotia, certainly not a place you think of as dangerous or crime riddled. I think of it as retirees and entrepreneurs trying to start, I don't know, roadside apple sales business. It's kind of like the only time I go to Acadia to Wolfville is once a year. I go to like a U-pick farm where you go on the farm and you can pick all these apples.
Well, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'll get like a truckload of apples, and then on the way home, I'll stop in Wolfville and get a coffee.
And how far from Halifax are we talking? Is Wolfville?
I don't know, an hour and a half maybe.
Oh, that's not too far. Okay.
No, certainly not. And it's like to give a sense of what it's like. If you've read Stephen King, every Stephen King story is set in a town just like Wolfville. It's that kind of place. Just
awesome.
Small, quaint little place.
Where nothing bad ever happens.
No, but in this case, in 1992, something happened. Kenley's time in Wolfville, there's not a lot to say about it because it's
so short.
It is so short. You can wrap it up by saying he gets there, meets a few people, goes to a couple parties, and walks off. That's how it seems. Yeah. But let's give the longer version of that. So he arrives in Wolfville with his sister, who her name is Kayreen, but it seems like everyone back then at least called her Kay. So I'm just going to...
Oh, okay.
The story takes place in 92, so I'm going to call her Kay. He goes to university with his sister, so he's not going alone, although he's described by family, his sister and mother, as being a bit apprehensive on going, not necessarily excited about it.
Yeah.
Not that into the Frosh Week activities, and seemed to, for the most part, keep to himself, although he meets a few friends. He's living in a tower, which is like a student housing, like on campus. It's a large apartment building, but it's all, students
like
living
dorms.
there. Yeah, dorm room.
Yeah.
So he meets a few people there who describe him as a laid-back guy, keeps to himself, seems wise, beyond his years, up late at night, all hours of the night, just kind of doing his own thing, but seems comfortable in just being on his own, I guess, is the way.
Well, it sounds like yeah, he's quiet and shy and reserved, but he has no trouble making a friend, which is awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And some of and the friends that he makes along the way at Acadia, they certainly come into his story, because one of his last sighting of him seems to be like kind of the closest friend he makes during his time there. Really the things other than the last moments prior to his disappearance, or where he was last seen, there's kind of two events to talk about that will come up. One is a supper with friends at a place called Corcom's Island, which is a small island in the area that I would call it like cottage country. People go there with a summer home.
It sounds like
fishing.
somewhere I want to live.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Why don't you tell us a bit about what happens on Corcom's Island, why he was there, what he was doing?
So the first weekend at Acadia, he meets these two people and they go to Corcom's Island. Mm-hmm. And one of the people he meets, her name is Kristen, and her dad lives there. So they went to stay at her dad's house, and it looked like a wicked property. It was like waterfront. They had jet skis. They had a great weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's photos of him there where he looks happy, loving his life. And this is only this trip to Corcom's Island is only 6 days after he even arrived. So it's like he gets to school, meets a couple people, and one of them's like, "We go to my dad's place for the weekend."
And they were like, "Okay."
Yeah. So
who wouldn't?
He hops on.
So they meet a couple people throughout this weekend, but it said that there was always kind of people in and around the house. It was a sociable place. Mm-hmm. And it's alleged that investigators have placed, he's not a murderer. How would I put this? Dangerous offender?
Bad person who is connected to a lot of murders, but I don't believe convicted of any.
Right.
That he's suspected of.
Anyway, investigators placed Andrew Paul Johnson in the area, and specifically having dinner at the Tomlinson home. That's her last name, that Kristen.
Yeah.
No one can confirm this, though.
Yeah, and I put a big star next to this theory or whatever. But for people who've listened to my show, I've done an episode about the disappearance of Kimberly McAndrew, who was a young woman who went missing when she got off of work at Canadian Tire in Halifax. She basically got off early, walked out the doors, and was never seen again. Andrew Paul Johnson has always, from the very beginning, been like the primary suspect in that case, as well as several other missing and unsolved cases from Nova Scotia around that time, to the point that I think if in the early 90s, if you go missing in Nova Scotia or you are found dead, it's like Andrew Paul Johnson is the leading theory, it seems. If you read about unsolved cases in Nova Scotia, his name comes up over and over again. So when I hear that he's connected to Kenley's story in some way or another, I'm not really surprised. It would make sense that people bring his name up as a possible theory. But it seems in Kenley's case, they haven't been able to confirm that Andrew Paul Johnson was definitively at this island. So I don't know. I'm not too swayed by this idea that he was there.
Well,
or that they knew each other anyway.
No, not only did they interviewed this Andrew Paul Johnson for this documentary. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you can't trust a psychopath. I know that. But he denies ever meeting him. He denies ever being at this house. And even everyone else that was present at the house. Don't you think that when finally Andrew got arrested and he was all over the news, someone would have said, "Wasn't that guy at that house that weekend?" Like, I don't know. It's just, it's a little too wishy-washy for me. Yeah,
but either way, that's one thing about this weekend getaway to Corcom's Island that comes up a lot, is that Andrew Paul Johnson may have been there. Maybe he wasn't, and it was just a little weekend that's irrelevant to Kenley's ultimate disappearance. But in his short time in Wolfville, he meets some friends. They have supper at one of their family's homes, and they go away for this weekend to Corcoran's Island. The next kind of big event to talk about, and this one is personally, I think, is much more important, is of course this is the beginning of year at Acadia. So there's Frosh Week, there's big parties, there's a lot of people meeting and hitting on each other and all these sorts of things. There's a major party in the tower that that Kenley lives in that everybody in the school seems to be involved in, and it seems like it's like, this is like the event to kick off the year. Kenley shows up for the party, appears by all accounts and all reports that I've found to have drank far too much and was maybe out of line with some people, and seemed to, I wouldn't say like make enemies, but he certainly didn't make everyone happy.
He ruffled a few feathers.
That's a good way to put it. And I've seen interviews with people whose feathers were ruffled by Kenley that night. I believe Kenley maybe said some, I will just say hitting on their girlfriends and this sort of thing, which not crazy or bizarre. Those sorts of things I'm sure happen with first year students at universities when they're drinking at the beginning of the year.
And especially if he's like feeling anxious, that didn't help. Yeah.
But what I think is important about this and why this is such a big deal is in the days after this, like Kenley's still around for a couple days after, but he's certainly laying low. I think you called it, maybe he's dealing with a bit of hangxiety.
Yeah.
I had never heard that term. And I was like, hangxiety, is that a typo or something? But then I'm like, wait, I've had hangxiety every time I drank alcohol. That's why I don't
literally
drink.
Every time. Yes. Yeah. So I get hangxiety often.
Okay. So
and it's for those of you who are wondering what hangxiety is, it's the anxiety you experience after a night of drinking. It's, maybe you blacked out and you're like, oh my God, what stupid thing did I say or do? Or like alcohol is a depressant. So this is not surprising.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay.
That's what it sounds like to me. Anxiety. I can't believe you've never heard that.
I've never heard of it, but it's so good. It's kind of like the mental aspect of a hangover. Because like a hangover is generally, I think of it as physical, but no, there is this kind of emotional and mental aspect where you're just like,
absolutely,
I'm worthless.
Right.
I'm going to be worthless all day.
Forever.
But I could see, it makes a bit of sense when I think of the events that lead up to Kenley's disappearance. I firmly believe, and I'll explain further, that this party has a big part to play in it. But even actually, just to back up slightly, even before the party, some people had described Kenley as seeming to not be himself. There was one person who ran into him at like a gas station, I think the day before the party, and was like, he was just kind of seemed a little weird. He was kind of on the wrong side of town, aimlessly, there was no obvious reason he was over here, and he just seemed a little like withdrawn. But I guess if you think of someone, someone goes missing and you start asking the people who saw them, everyone's going to have something to say, and it's kind of a question of how far you read into that. But
and I noticed, or I thought about it today, and I missed it in our notes, but the same day, September 17th, that Kenley's friend ran into him at the gas station and he was acting all weird, we find out in this documentary, there's documented proof Kenley was admitted into the hospital on September 17th. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if this was before or after this little meeting with his friend. And I'm pretty sure he was admitted for like mental health issues, for depression and whatever else.
So and that kind of he had something going on, right? Like there was something going on, and he's in a new place at school, which he didn't seem to be completely excited about. He had been traveling the world for the last year or two. Acadia, Wolfville would be so boring after living the life Kenley had lived for the last year or two.
Yeah, exactly.
He goes to the massive party in the tower. He gets hammered. The next day, he is laying low. No one sees him, I don't believe, the day after the party, which is Saturday the 19th. There's no sightings of him. The next day, which is Sunday, 2 days after the party, he goes to a bank machine and he withdraws $20 out of his, I think he had over $4,000. So he had some money in there, took out $20, sees his sister, like he's alive and well. People see him. I don't know if would be appropriate, but he did.
His sister comes to his dorm room at about 4 p.m.
Okay.
Because she wasn't at the party. She was in Halifax. So she hadn't seen him all weekend. So she went to his dorm and was like, I heard about Friday.
Oh man, that's an awful feeling. Hey, when it's
and she said when she walked in, he was laying on his bed like
just like, oh shit. Yeah. Dealing like still in that anxiety kind of state. But they
know that it takes me 5 business days to recover.
Oh really?
So
okay.
Yeah.
I'm about 2, but and that's why I don't drink. And because I only if I have half a beer, I'm like, or half a drink, tomorrow is like a write-off. I'm worthless. I'm getting chips in a movie.
Yeah. Well, and I get life-threatening hangovers. So
life-threatening? Yeah. Are you being dramatic?
I'm not.
No.
Ask anyone that knows me.
You're just like you just managed to survive each time.
Like I'm talking like I have thrown up for 8 hours before.
Oh, wow.
I think that's called alcohol poisoning.
Okay, yeah. Well, you have a good time though. So
this is also why I don't drink often.
Well, let's get into it. So Kenley sees his sister. She's checking in on him because she heard that he was, living it up and maybe wasn't doing great afterwards. They have plans to meet later in the week to study together because they're taking some of the same courses.
Just the next night.
Oh, is it? Okay. So it's the following night. Monday night is when they're planning to meet.
Yeah.
There's only 2 more sightings of Kenley that are notable. One is around 9 p.m. this night, the day prior to his disappearance. Why don't you tell us about the RA, which seems to be like, his name is Todd. I guess the RA is like the guy on campus whose job it is to kind of like make sure everyone's okay and be the mediator or the intermediary between like the people living there and like the administrators of the building or something.
They call it an RA, which I think stands for resident assistant.
Okay.
It's called something else now though. It's resident something. But anyway, I'm sure it differs from school to school.
Yeah.
But yes, this Todd comes to Kenley's dorm room at about 9 p.m. He has a document or something he wanted him to sign.
It seemed like some version, maybe not a lease, that might not be the right word, but it seemed like some kind of like agreement about living there that everyone needed to sign. Like, I don't know exactly what it was, but it could have been a consent thing or, some kind of form paperwork crap that he had to sign.
So he goes and it said that Kenley opens the door, but like just a little bit to like look out and whatever. He like talks to him for a few seconds, signs the paper or whatever he needs to do. Maybe he just takes it. I don't know. And then Todd, for whatever reason, got the impression that Kenley was ironing. And I mean, I'm not sure if that's a huge like smoking gun clue.
No. When it's pretty much the second last sighting of him, people are, what was he doing? But
they're overanalyzing.
But someone ironing. I have a friend who, from high school to present day, he irons every single shirt. He could have a T-shirt that's like 25 years old of some like rock band that half the members are dead now. He would iron that shirt before he wears it, and that it's just the way he is. I don't.
And some people are like that.
Yeah, and I don't know how to use an iron. I know there's one in my house somewhere. My wife would know. I don't even know where it is.
I'll wear it wrinkly.
Yeah, that's me. If something's wrinkly, I just pop it in the dryer for a minute, and that usually does the trick.
I put it on the back of the bathroom door and take a hot shower.
Oh, you steam it. You just you need to simplify it. Kenley's mother has said he took good care of his clothes and he wanted to look good. Ironing wouldn't be unusual for him. So I think when you think of this sighting, when the RA Todd goes to the door to get Kenley to sign this paper, I think the only thing notable about it is that Kenley wasn't opening the door like, come on in and sit down, Todd. I think he was just a little like, I'm just going to get this done. I'll open the door, sign it, get out of here.
It doesn't sound like Kenley would be that kind of person anyway, especially on a Sunday night.
Yeah.
Be like, hey, come on in.
Come on in and
sit down.
Yeah. But the next day, which is the 21st of September, is the last time Kenley is seen. The final sighting of him is a bit of a mystery. Kenley, he's walking on the main street of Wolfville I believe in the direction pointing away from the university. He sees his good friend Tom, who was one of the people that he went to the Corkham's Island with just days prior. And I say good friend, they had only met at university, but they became quick friends.
My memory of that day and of the last time I saw Kenley was that I saw him from here across the other side of the street. Because of the distance, I gave him a wave only, so I didn't have a personal catch-up, one-to-one. He was wearing his trademark baseball cap and just sort of casual clothes. He didn't look any way out of the ordinary, like he was in a hurry, or I can't remember if he had a backpack or anything, but he certainly didn't look like he was particularly going anywhere. Just seemed, as I recall it now, to be strolling towards town on a normal Monday.
And that is the last time Kenley's seen. He hasn't been found. His backpack hasn't been found. His bank account hasn't been touched. Literally no trace of Kenley. And I would dare say not even a single clue. I haven't seen one thing that makes me go, ooh, that may change. Or I should say, I haven't seen one thing that happens after his disappearance that makes me say, oh, like this may explain what happened to him. I think when you talk about people vanishing or walking off the face of the earth, that's what happened to Kenley.
I don't think there is one like rock solid lead. Everything is hearsay, speculation. We are no closer to finding him than we were on September 21st, 1992.
There is no shortage of discussion and theories and finger pointing. Andrew Paul Johnson is one. We brought him up earlier. He's alleged to have been on that island, which would put him in the same area as Kenley about a week before his disappearance. But that is far from enough to sway me in any way that he's involved, as well as it doesn't necessarily, if you know Andrew Paul Johnson's story, what he's accused of is tricking people into his car and allegedly doing harm to them. He was arrested in Nanaimo, BC, when he was kind of on the run from Nova Scotia. He was arrested in Nanaimo, BC with what I would describe as a rape kit. It was like, like duct tape and a knife and a mask and I think plastic bags and stuff were in the trunk of his car. And he had a intellectually disabled woman that was in the back seat of his car that I believe was reported missing earlier in the day. And he was, and she was under the belief that he was a cop. He also had a fake badge.
Oh my God.
So dark stuff. And like I said, he's connected to a lot of Nova Scotian unsolved cases. His name comes up a lot. But without definitive proof that he was in the same area as Kenley or they, had any kind of connection, I don't see that as a likely scenario whatsoever.
I agree. He sounds like the Bernardo of Nova Scotia, though.
Yeah,
except I guess he didn't kill that we know of.
Yeah, but it's people will bring him up a lot, and I think we talked about that documentary. I think the documentary may only increase some of that conversation because they spend a whole episode of analyzing the possible connections between Andrew Paul Johnson and Kenley. They have the interview with him, as you said, and it really goes nowhere because Andrew Paul Johnson's like, don't know him, never heard of him, don't know anything about him, which is kind of a weird interview.
Well, and it's apparently the first interview in over 20 years. And I guess we didn't see everything. We didn't see all the footage they got. But if I got an interview with a dangerous offender for the first time in 20 years, I'd be making it the interview. Yeah, and that was of the whole documentary. That was certainly kind of a highlight, although it doesn't really relate to Kenley's case. Just to see, I've seen his name, know his story so well. To see him sitting there talking was certainly just an experience that I didn't expect. I was surprised to see him agreeing to take part in it. 100%. Well, and I told you I had never heard of this man before watching this documentary, and I believe you said, "Really? He's public enemy number one in Halifax."
That's a good way to put it.
I'm like, oh.
One other thing about the documentary and Andrew Paul Johnson is, I don't know if you noticed this guy, but there was several people who appeared in the documentary. One was a guy named Bev Ketty, they described him as a crime writer, I think is how he was only in the first like episode or two.
Okay.
It really shocked me to see him. Bev was a guest on my show quite a few times. And he passed away like a year and a half ago. This documentary, they'd been filming it for years. I had no idea.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, but when you watch it, you can kind of get a sense of the passage of time. But yeah, I was shocked to see him. But he wrote a lot about Andrew Paul Johnson and cases that he was connected to. So I think maybe that was a part of the reason that he was involved in the piece.
I bet.
But let's settle it once and for all. Do you see Andrew Paul Johnson as having a connection? Is there enough info there where you're like, we got to look at that?
No, I don't think so. They tried to place him at a campground close to Corcoran's Island. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's too circumstantial.
Yeah, I feel the same way. There are other theories that come up, and a lot of the theories in Kenley's case are in most missing persons cases. One of them is that they decided to walk off and lead a new life somewhere else in the world. In Kenley's case, there is some possibility and plausibility to that because he was worldly. He wouldn't have been uncomfortable going and planting trees and just finding his way into kind of the underground of that world, or maybe going back to South America where he had already been and, taking on a new identity or something. There is some discussion and some theory that could be the case. But that said, he did withdraw money before he disappeared, but it was only $20, leaving
and he left his
$4,000.
Passport.
He left his passport and $4,000 in the bank account. I'm thinking if he was going to just walk off, why wouldn't he take his passport, and why wouldn't he at least take more than $20?
Right.
It would only make sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to say because with his lifestyle, that's automatically what police did assume, because I don't believe his case or dorm room was ever treated as criminal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, they didn't really do much. They didn't collect evidence. They didn't, take photos and tape it off and all that stuff. They assumed that he left and didn't want to be found.
And that's one thing that makes missing person cases very difficult to solve if they're not quickly solved, is because there's not a criminal investigation, until well later where they're like, okay, something's going on here.
Well, and especially when there's no signs of foul play.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no, yeah.
But at the same time, it's like police can't. It's not reasonable for someone goes missing for them to just flip out every time and do a full investigation. Where does that line come? And
and especially an adult. He was 20.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Whoops.
Yeah, and I think for some people may have thought he had some stuff going on. Maybe he wasn't excited about being in university. I think if I was the police officer who got this report, I would think he's probably gone home or just went to the neighboring town or something for the weekend and give it a couple days. I could see why they weren't panicking or whatever right away. But when days go by and no one sees him and his bank accounts aren't touched, there's a cause for concern. But by the time that it becomes apparent there's more to this than him just walking off, people have been in and out of his apartment or his dorm room. So any of that, evidence is contaminated. There was an ashtray with cigarette butts in his dorm room. That was never collected. And it would be very interesting to know who was in there, smoking when he was last seen. Maybe it was him, but...
Right. But if it wasn't, who was in there? Yeah,
it's just some examples of how your trail can disappear if the police don't really jump on it with an investigation rather than just a kind of wait and see, he'll turn up kind of approach.
Well, when you're not worried, when you don't think there's any reason to pay close attention to something, why would you?
Yeah, certainly. But I think the walk off and start a new life thing, the reason that theory, I think, gets so much discussion in Kenley's and in every other missing persons case that it's brought up in, is it's hard to disprove, because it's just like one of those things. It's like there's no way to like prove he didn't really. You can plead and make a case like I did. He didn't touch his money and, you know, whatever. But in Kenley's case, if you want to say that's possible that he did walk off to start a new life or whatever, what you can look for and point to as evidence of that is multiple quote unquote sightings of Kenley that people had in the days, weeks, years after his disappearance that seemed quite genuine, and people who have like detailed descriptions. You want to rattle through some of them? I know you had this.
Well, and it's the fact that 3 out of we'll kind of go over 4 of the sightings. 3 of them all happened in Halifax, and under I believe 2 of the circumstances, I want to say it's information that only Kenley would have known, or the person they were talking to. So we'll start right at the beginning.
Yeah.
So the first sighting was alleged sighting was Kenley's uncle in 1993 was in the Halifax airport, and he was walking, and there was a young man by the bar with like a backwards baseball cap. They made eye contact, and the uncle like kind of was like, "Oh, was that Kenley?" and stopped. So he turned around and went back like moments later, and the man wasn't there, but there was a full cold beer sitting where the man had been. Okay. So it's like he bailed really quick, right? That one's kind of weird.
Yeah, and he was concerned enough that he kind of walked around trying to find this guy.
Yeah, he went outside and was like, he vanished. I wasn't gone that long, but
the idea that Kenley leaves university and is at the airport trying to like flee the country, and he's like, "Oh crap, that's my uncle. I'm out of here." Like that it's too much like a movie or something. I can't see that being real. And
why would he hang around Halifax?
And at the time, it's people in 92 when this was happening after he disappeared, you know, there was a lot of discussion about it. It's in the news. It would be very high risk to show up in the largest city in your province, sitting at the airport having a beer. It just
However, it was all over the news, but it still was 1992.
Yeah, that's true.
The next 2 sightings that we go over aren't reported until months later because they don't know Kenley's missing until they see his missing persons poster.
And I hate to do this, but when I listen to the stories, each one of them, if you change the background music behind the telling of the sightings, they sound like ghost stories.
They do.
Yeah. So we had the one with the airport with the cold drink left behind at the table as this figure just disappears. Tell me about when he's seen outside of, or alleged to be seen outside the largest bar in Halifax. When was that he was seen at the bar?
That would have been September of 93. It was like exactly 1 year after. And I especially like this story because I think it's just it's so credible. So this man, right? His there's this man. His name's James, and he's standing in line at the Palace. I didn't realize that was the largest bar in Halifax.
It's one of them. Back in '92, it's like it would be the 2 or 3 largest like all night party dance bar kind of places. It's certainly not where you would go if you wanted to lay low.
Okay, so this James guy is standing in line with his friend, and he turns around and makes conversation with this other guy in line. They, start shooting the shit. This man says he's going to Acadia. James replies with, he's going to school somewhere else. I can't remember.
I think it was like in PEI, a neighboring province, I think. Is
something like that.
He said.
Right. It was a neighboring province. And this man said, "Oh, you might know my cousin. Wendell, I think his name was." And lo and behold, this James was like, "Oh, yeah, I do know him," or whatever. So they talk for a couple more minutes. This James turns to talk to his other friend. And by the time he turns back around, this man that he was talking to was gone. So whatever, I imagine he didn't think much of it. The following weekend, this James goes home and he runs into, lo and behold, Wendell. And he said, hey, I ran into your cousin this weekend. And this guy's like, oh, like, I don't know who that would be. Can you describe him? Or because he didn't get his name, of course. So he's describing who he saw. And this Wendell can't believe it. He's like, you're describing Kenley. So he goes, do you think you'd be able to recognize a photo of him if I showed you a photo? And he was like, probably. So even back in 1993 and, 24 years later, when this documentary was being filmed, this James is 100% certain he was talking to Kenley. He is like, this is absolutely the man I was talking to.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's so bizarre that I just can't believe it. I think that if you're missing for a year and it's been in the news and you're a missing Acadia student, you're in Halifax at like, one of the 2 or 3 largest bars that's going to be full of university students. I have 2 thoughts on it. One is like, how would somebody else not have seen him and recognized him from, the news or Acadia or something? Second, right. He hasn't been touching his bank account. So where's he getting like the money to like pay cover and go drinking on a night out in Halifax? And,
yeah, I don't know.
And then, like I said earlier, it sounds like it's a ghost story, for goodness sakes. Like he was there and he just said enough to lead back to who he was. And then he vanished into the night. It seems too strange to be true, and
then he vanished into the night.
Well, that's what it sounds like. He just turned to mist, and that's why when I heard that story, I'm like, wow, that's fascinating, but I don't necessarily. I'm not going to hang my hat on Kenley was in Halifax.
It's the cousin thing.
It is weird though, eh?
It's the cousin thing, and then there was one other sighting in Halifax when a guy who had met Kenley when they were kids. Mm-hmm. Had reported months later. He said, yeah, I ran into him months ago. I didn't realize he was missing, but like I talked to him and he seemed normal. So do you believe in ghosts?
I do, yeah.
I wonder if I don't know, for whatever reason they saw his spirit.
Well, these stories, like I said, you change the music behind the discussion to like this creepy, moody music. And it's exactly sounds like ghost stories, but I don't believe, like, I don't see any reason why Kenley's ghost would be at a bar in downtown Halifax. Like what I would have wanted to say if I was interviewing or talking to the person who was giving this story about like, I saw him at the bar, I would be like, how much were you drinking that night? Because I guarantee he wasn't standing in the bar in the lineup to get in like an all night dance bar, dead sober. Like going in there for supper or something. It's like, how good is your memory and how, like, what were you drinking? Like, I just don't put a lot of stock.
Were there drugs involved?
Yeah, just like, come on.
It was the 90s. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But then, you do hear of people leaving and starting a new life. And in the 90s, it would have been a lot easier.
Yeah, it's true.
Why would you stay in Halifax?
Without social media and all this stuff, it would be easier to walk away. But why would he not take his money? That's what I don't get.
Right.
Why would you make it that hard on yourself? Because you could take cash. It's not like you're using a credit card that's going to leave a trail.
Yeah.
He could just go to that bank machine before he walks off and take, $800. Why 20?
Yeah. I don't know.
Why? And why not take your passport just in case, if you're going to take a backpack to walk away from life with, taking your passport and more of your money, it seems like it'd just be kind of making life possibly easier for you.
Well, and you never know. Like, he suffered a few mental health problems. What if he just kind of had a mental break and was like, things like that happen. Mm-hmm. And it's, yeah. I mean, of course, I don't know, just speculation, but that would explain why he kind of hung around in the area. And but then again, it's been 30 years. So, okay. Yeah.
So we went through a few possible theories that are discussed. I don't think either of us are too sold on either, but one we should get into, and this is another one that gets attached to many and most missing persons cases, is that the missing person decided to walk away and end their own life voluntarily by suicide. In Kenley's story, there's no question that he had some stuff going on within him leading up to this. There was some change in his life because he moved from home to go to school, which is a bit of a commitment, which can be stressful in a small town, which could suck possibly. And then when you add into that he's fairly new there, and a couple days earlier, he did something that, at least according to some people who were at this party, may have made him unhappy and uncomfortable in his own body or in this place. Do you think the theory that he died by suicide is one worth considering?
We'd be fools not to consider it. It all points to, logically, if we want to just look at things logically, that's probably what happened, but nothing was ever found. Mm-hmm. So we don't know. It sounds like he was very familiar with Nova Scotia, though, and there's a lot of land there, a lot of forest. Yeah. If he wanted to hide himself, I'm sure he could have.
Yeah, and we talked the idea of or that he had a history with traveling on his own. He had a history with working in the woods. He had a backpack with him. It wouldn't have been difficult for Kenley to find his way far away from Acadia University by foot. That wouldn't be something. It wouldn't be hard for him. But when I think of the possibility that suicide is a factor, what really makes me believe that it's likely, in Kenley's case specifically, is the story that one of his friends told in the documentary, where it was the guy he went to South America with, and he described this night where they were on this ferry or on this boat. They were all drinking and like playing cards and stuff. And then later in the kind of in the middle of the night, the buddy that Kenley was traveling with, his buddy, realized Kenley.
There's a ferry from, I think the little town is La Paz, and over to the mainland Mexican city of Mazatlan, which is a big city. And as an overnight ferry, it's a pretty good distance. And so it's big open water. It's the Pacific Ocean. We were playing cards, and there was an Australian guy, and he had this bottle of mezcal. It was a round bottle with the worm in it. And we weren't particularly cautious in our consumption of it. And I didn't think too much of the fact that Kenley wasn't there with us anymore. He was apt to do his own thing. But I did go looking for him and found him up on the top deck. It was a big boat. There were a few hundred people on it, many levels and rooms. And he was on the top deck on the other side of the barricade where the lifeboats are, with nothing between him and the ocean. He was looking pretty comfortable out there. He wasn't certainly not worried about his situation, because he must have, consciously climbed over that barricade and wanted to be close to death. I immediately said, "You should be on this side of the railing. It's not safe out there." And he complied. And I don't have a clear recollection of exactly what happened after that. The next day, I did bring it up to him. I mentioned how close he'd come to disappearing off the face of the earth, and he was. He said he had no memory of it.
When I think of that, I think alcohol's involved. Much like prior to Kenley's disappearance, there's a bit of alcohol happening there. I don't know, just something about this. I'm like, this is an important part of the story.
And mix that in with his prior mental health issues. Mm-hmm. It's dark, but if he didn't, depression and suicide surprises us. Yeah. How many celebrities, or even just people that you would have never thought, and they're
When something like that happens, I think everybody just thinks of their last conversations and the last time they saw them, and read so into it. And I find with Kenley, that's kind of what's happening. All this attention is given to all these little breadcrumbs that are left behind, and maybe some of them will lead somewhere, maybe not. But if Kenley decided to walk off to never be found again, I think he could do it. And he wouldn't need more than $20 in a backpack.
That's true. But you'd think something would be found. Something, anything.
Yeah, exactly. But there was not a note. The only notes that were left behind, actually what we didn't really hit on is how he was actually reported missing. Although I guess it's probably assumed what could happen. But he didn't show up for classes. His sister was the one who went to check on him at his dorm room and found his dorm room empty. What was left instead was, I believe people were leaving notes on his door, like, where are you, sort of thing.
I think they said, like, call your mom, call your sister.
Yeah, because people were like, when he didn't show up for classes, wasn't heard from, people were checking in and couldn't find him. But aside from that sighting of seeing him walking down the main street in Wolfville, that was, that was it. But
that's all.
Like, I guess ultimately no suicide note, no obvious reason to look in that direction other than it being a possibility.
Yeah.
Foul play comes up a lot. Kenley was alleged to have had some, I don't know if I would use the word struggles, but maybe some like mystery around his sexuality is how I would put it. A question around his sexuality. It's looked on by some that he may have had relationships that others didn't know about, and maybe he found himself in harm as a result of that. Whatever was happening in, this lifestyle that his friends and family maybe didn't know about. But again, I have never seen any evidence to support that, and it seems to be just the kind of fodder for theorists who are trying to question what it could have been.
If that was the case and he was struggling, with his sexuality or whatever the case, it would make the suicide or runaway theory even more plausible, because LGBTQ youth are, I should know the exact number, but I think it's like 30 or 35% more likely to commit suicide. And I'm sure it was higher back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bet. In 92, if you ever go back and you watch some of those movies, like popular movies from the 90s, especially with like anti-gay, transphobic, like that kind of stuff was in like the big popular movies. Not too long ago, I watched Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Do you know that movie?
I've never seen it.
Okay, well, you're not missing anything.
Okay, perfect.
It didn't age well for a variety of reasons, aesthetically as well as culturally, because it was like one of the biggest movies at the time. And one of the characters, like one of the main characters, whenever guys like get close to him, there was one scene I remember, I think his friend like gave him a hug or tried to kiss him on the cheek or something. And he like pushed him away and called him like a derogatory term for, like a gay person or something. I was just like, whoa, like this was a big movie and like a Hollywood picture in 92, which, if a kid watched that movie today, it's like from like this bygone era. But for me, I remember like seeing it in the theater. I guess it made me feel old, but also just shocked at how the conversation has changed.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, now we have to address, I'm going to call this the elephant in the Kenley Matheson disappearance. There is one theory that for anyone who watched the documentary about Kenley's disappearance, or anyone who reads any articles going forward about Kenley's disappearance, the Kenny family is going to come up. The documentary spends kind of the last, 25% of itself examining the possibility.
It's like the last full 2 episodes.
Yeah, of a 5-part series.
Of a 5-part series, yeah.
They really zone in on this family called the Kennys as being involved. And if I was just to put it as simply as possible, basically there's this family of people who half of them seem to have turned on the other half, but they all seem to believe that one of the members of the family's son, who or was a son, now is living as a woman, they believe that she is the person responsible, and it all stems back to this statement that she lives as she now, so I'm going to refer to her as she. She made a statement long ago when someone said, I think her mother said, like, "Oh, have you heard about this missing boy in Acadia?" And the daughter, named Aaron, said, "Yeah, he did something he shouldn't have, and we took care of him. They'll never see him again. He's in a bear cave in, some mountain somewhere." So this kind of crazy statement. But the documentary then goes to show that everything this person says is crazy, out of this world statements that, even their sexuality involves the story of like aliens coming and killing the male version of themselves, and now they're like this female version that involves aliens, and it's just all over the place. So if I was to summarize the Kenny family theory, it is that this really unique, strange person made a statement, and a lot of people in their family do think that they're involved. They went to Acadia at the time, so maybe they would have an ability to be in the ballpark, but they traveled around on a bike. I don't think they took Kenley on their bike and brought him up to a bear cave or something.
Well, and then, so after the first half of the family came out and like went as far as to call Crime Stoppers and everything, then the younger sister piled in.
I should
and
say
was
as
like,
well.
yes.
I just want to interrupt because a member of the family called Crime Stoppers to say that we think it was like our niece our niece, I think nephew at the time. Crime Stoppers didn't take it seriously and all but ignored it. So they instead, did they not contact the people making the film?
So Kenley's family hired a private investigator.
Yes.
And the private investigator somehow got this tip from Crime Stoppers or something like that.
The Kenny family contacted him directly and said,
"Is that what it is?"
That's what it was, because he probably was in the news at the time when this documentary was being made. It would have been public that he was involved, and his name is Tom Martin. He was also a guest on my show before last month. But he's a highly respected private investigator. He's a former homicide detective with the Halifax police. So there was news articles going around when this documentary was being made that Kenley's story is being examined in a documentary.
Okay.
So this Kenny family could very well have seen those articles and been like, Crime Stoppers doesn't care. I'm going to write, this person that's investigating it. No, I don't believe, if it came out that this person was involved, I would be more shocked than I would if it came out that Kenley was actually at the dance bar in Halifax a year after his disappearance. That's how I will put it.
That is how sure you are.
That's how sure I am. I think the balance of all the different options and possibilities, I think the only person who knows what happened, I think the reason this hasn't been solved is because the only person who knows what happened is Kenley, and he's not here to tell the story of, where he went or what happened to him. That's my theory. And it's heartbreaking because he left behind a family who is torn apart and left, dedicating their lives to the search that up until now, the only place I'm sure that it has gone to is, hope, despair, hope, despair, hope, despair. And, every little tip or clue, it's going to bring hope. And whether or not they find him or something like that, it's like alive.
30 years is a long time.
Absolutely.
30 years is a long time.
Of course it's possible, and I can understand why the family would hold out with that possibility, but I think I don't expect this to be solved. If it wasn't solved in the first few years, it's only going to get harder.
Well, and it was very heartbreaking at the very, very end of the documentary. Kenley's mother, who's now well into her, probably 70s, mm-hmm. She, 30 years later, went out to the mountainside where a tip was reported. And she's looking under rocks and stuff. And I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, that was horrible. If anyone knows there's a substantial amount of money on the table through the reward. There's a lot of publicity for his story, more so in the last 2 or 3 years than there has ever been, as far as I can tell. Mainly as a result of the documentary that's available on Amazon Prime. Even when you search Kenley's name now, what you're finding is just article after article, indirectly in some way, about, the documentary. And, I guess that's the power of the documentary, of a major documentary coming out, is it just boosts the profile of a story and gives a whole bunch of new details, allows people to see and hear from the people involved. Kenley's story has certainly benefited from that documentary, but I think ultimately, having watched it and having read everything I could about his case, I still feel like I wouldn't know any more. I don't know any more now than I would have if I had been on Acadia campus back in September of '92.
It's so hard to say.
Well, let's start wrapping this up. Maddie, you released a new video just yesterday that you talked about, or 2 days ago, that you talked about last time you were on the show, the covering the Shell Lake massacre.
Shell Lake, yeah.
Yeah. What's next for you? What are you working on? What are you doing?
I've decided I'm going to release a video on Kenley.
Okay.
I'll probably shoot for Tuesday. And then after that, because I just found out about Andrew Paul Johnson, I'm going to talk about him coming up. So
you'll do an episode, like a video or an episode about his story specifically?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm interested. I know very little right now, so I'm excited to kind of dig a little deeper.
Okay. That one is very, very dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can send you some stuff about that, because when I did my episode a couple of years ago about the disappearance of Kim McAndrew, Andrew Paul Johnson, she got off work at Canadian Tire, walked out of the building, was never seen again. Coincidentally, Andrew Paul Johnson lived in the building next to Canadian Tire, in his bedroom window. Like, you look out his window, you would see the door to Canadian Tire. So he was, unlike Kenley's story, he was right there when this happened. And there's other connections to other missing and murdered women, like, that same summer, basically.
Well, they don't put just anyone on the dangerous offenders list.
Yeah, certainly. So, you gotta, like, quote unquote, earn that for sure.
Yeah. You gotta be a real special kind of asshole to end up on that list.
That's a good way to put it. All right. Well, Maddie, I appreciate having you here tonight. I appreciate you breaking down the Kenley Matheson story.
Thank you for having me. I love doing these.
Well, let's do another one next Thursday.
I'll be here.
I want to thank you for joining Maddie and I for our discussion surrounding the disappearance of Kenley Matheson. For those who'd like to learn more about Kenley's disappearance, I've added a link to the documentary we'd referenced in this episode's description. It's definitely an interesting watch. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode of Nighttime, but before we part here, I have some thanks. First, a big thanks to Maddie for sharing another evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. Shout out to Monty Datta, who contributes the music to this series, and to LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides the intro and outro voiceovers. But lastly, and most importantly, I have a massive thank you to everyone who listens to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, the show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. But with that said, keeping the show alive is and has always been an uphill battle. So if you want to help take a bit of weight off the show's back, please consider listening on the premium feed. And not only does the premium feed fund the creation of the show, it'll give you more of each topic than you'll find on the free feed, as I'm adding exclusive content regularly and maintain a full back catalog of episodes only on the premium feed. So for about the price of a cup of coffee, you can go premium at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And I'd also like to thank the newest subscribers, Larissa, Tyler, and Jerry. Thank you for your generous support. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show but can't do it with a premium feed subscription, you can give me a big hand by simply sharing this episode on social media and letting like-minded friends know what we're doing here. If there's a Canadian missing person case you'd like to hear featured on the show, please let me know at nighttimepodcast@gmail.com. If there's a Canadian missing persons case you'd like to see featured on this show, go to my website, nighttimepodcast.com, and send me a message through the contact portal. Also, I prioritize cases submitted by friends, family, and advocates, so be sure to fill me in if you have any connection to the case. And to anyone listening who'd like to contribute a voice memo or story idea or just general feedback on the show, you can contact me there as well. I hope to hear from you all, but until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.